a couple, pair, a pair of something, dozen. Oh, this is kind of technically there. So one of the students mentioned it, so I kind of liked it, so I'm keeping it here. Probably not the same as the rest of the categories. And a mole. Now mole's highlighted because that's our subject, but I'm listing all these down because they all highlight a similar idea. They're all talking about numbers. When you try to say, oh, I have a couple of something, a couple of screwdrivers, I don't know, right? So that means you mean two of something. A pair of something also means two. Couple is kind of loosely used. Maybe you can mean slightly more than two, I guess. I'm not too sure, I guess. But a dozen, let's move on. A dozen means 12 of something, exactly 12 of something. A kilo would imply 1,000 of something, right? Like a kilogram would mean 1,000 of grams, where a kilometer would imply 1,000 meters, right? Then you have the mole, which implies, oh, it's just, 6.2 times 10 to the power 23 of something. So a mole is not so different from, let's say, a dozen. They're exactly the same. Only chemists get to use this because they're the only one in the world who deal with huge number of things. What are they? Well, they talk about atoms. For like a small few grams of an atom, you can have a large number of atoms. So it's better for them to count the number of atoms in terms of moles. And why do they need to count? Well, because they want to figure out because chemical reactions react in a certain ratio. So if you know the number of one compound reacting, then you can figure out how much the other is required for it to react. ठीक है? Why is a mole exactly 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd of something? Well, that kind of corresponds to the periodic table, or their MR of elements that are there, right? So the MR for carbon is 12, for nitrogen it's 14, for oxygen it is 16. Note, it's always the larger number, the smaller number is protons. Don't remember ऊपर क्या होता है, नीचे क्या होता है, but the larger number is always the mass, smaller number is the protons. Why? The obvious logical reason is the mass is the sum of protons plus neutrons, which is not written here. So obviously it's going to be the larger number compared to the proton number. But why is a mole this? So if you have this many atoms of, let's say, carbon, if I have this many atoms of carbon, I'll just use the word mole from now on because it's easier to say. If I have 1 moles of carbon, उसका mass will be equal to exactly 12 grams. Exactly 12 grams. Why? Because that's what it means. 1 mole will be equal to the MR of any product. 1 mole of nitrogen will be exactly 14 grams. 1 mole of oxygen atom will be 16 grams, right? Not molecule. We haven't talked about molecules yet. ठीक है? And obviously, if I have, let's say, let me change my color. If I have 2 moles of carbon, well, that's going to be twice as heavy, or it'll be 24 grams. If I have, let's say, 6 grams of carbon, which is half, right? So I should have, because 1 mole was 12 grams, so 6 gram is X. What is this going to be? Well, this is going to be 0.5 moles, 0.5 moles of carbon. ठीक है? So at this point, it's just ratios. So if I want to make like this ratio, turn it into an equation, so I'm always multiplying the number of moles by the MR to find out the mass. So the mass is going to be the moles I have times the MR, right? And that makes sense because if the carbon MR is 12, if I have 1 mole, 12 times 1 is 12, 12 times 2 is 24, 12 times half is 6. So this equation is representing this data set. Okay? And just to make the equation more friendlier, I'll rearrange it and it now looks something like this. It's moles equal to mass of the particle over the MR. So if you have moles of a particle and you know what the particle is, you can find out its MR, you can know its mass, the missing quantity. Or the other way around, if you know its mass, you can always find its MR if you know that quantity. उसका MR अगर आपको पता है, to find out the moles of that item.